Welcome to Romanov Cosplay. Today I'm going to be showing you how I created my Asirpa Cosplay from the series Golden Kamuy. So without further ado, let's get right into the video. I'm going to start with a quick introduction to the character along with her historical origins. Asirpa is from the anime series Golden Kamuy, which takes place during the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 through 1905. Being set in Hokkaido, we follow the Hokkaido Ainu, who Asirpa is a part of. The Ainu are the indigenous people of Japan and Siberia. Note, this is not a recreation using historical methods. Starting off with the materials. Traditionally, these garments would have been made from atush fibers spun from the inner bark of the elm tree, or fibers made from nettles. The first layer was made from a fabric I got at Joann's. I really liked the fabric because it had a slightly woven texture, and it was on sale. I also really liked it for its paper-like texture, if that makes any sense. For the Haori-like garment, also known as the atush robe, I used an imitation suede. Now, using hides isn't an inaccurate method, as the Ainu made many garments out of furs and skins. For the trim, I used a felt fabric. I also used this from the matenposhi, and for the fabric on the mitts. The fur is a imitation husky fur I also got at Joann's. So for the knives, also known as the Manakumakuri knives, I used a EVA foam. Obviously, that's not historically accurate. Historically, these weapons would have been made from bone and had a lot of significant meaning, as the Ainu had a very strong hunting heritage. And these knives were covered in bear penis skins during a ceremony to evoke bear spirits. I did not recreate this historical detail, also as not to offend the local bear population. Oh, and I used table mats. Table mats. Continuing on with the creation. Fun fact, did you know this is the first cosplay I ever used a sewing machine for? Everything before this was sewn by hand. Now, I didn't use any historical patterns, however, I really wished I did. Originally, I tried to use a similar pattern to my Nezuko Haori, but I miscalculated how much fabric I would need, and it ended up kind of like my Tanya uniform. However, this is not really a big deal, as the robe fits well and it matches the silhouette as in the show, which isn't really the most historically accurate. The pattern consists of 4 panels, a square on the front that is cut in half, a square on the back, 2 on the sides kind of acting like an insert, and then 2 for the sleeves. For the trim, I traced the shapes from the show and then sewed or glued them on. I marked them out with marker, which I really would not recommend doing, because especially since I used a paint marker, it bled a lot, so a lot of the white embroidery turned somewhat of a pinkish color. Just a bit of a thing to know. For the purple on the sides of the robe, I just used a purple seam tape. For the kimono she wears underneath, I accurately this time used my Nezuko kimono pattern. Then at the bottom, I cinched the sides using a embroidery thread. I purposely made the kimono sleeveless as to make it a little more temperature friendly for those hot Arizona cons. Then finally, I hemmed everything. For the fur cape, I simply draped the fur over my mannequin. Then I cut the bottom to imitate the tattered effect of the original. And around the fur collar, there is a piece of faux leather with a foam clay disc. For the mitts, I cut the shape of the mitt and then hemmed it down to size. Then I covered the edges in seam tape. Then I punched some holes in the side where I then embroidered them into hand-sewn eyelet holes, which is a historical detail. Finally, I repeated the embroidery process on both of the mitts until they are complete. Finally, for the headband, also known as the matenposhi, I cut the shape onto felt. I had to resize this a few times as it's a little bit hard to get. And then I embroidered it. Finally, I tied the back of the headband into a knot and then tacked it with a seam. Finally, for the necklace, which was pretty straightforward, I just cut out the shape onto some felt, and then for the details, I used EVA foam, and I twisted some wire a little bit to give it the almost flower-like shape that the original has. Now moving on to the embroidery. Ainu garments were beautifully embroidered with the intentions of the wearer and the creator. This was my first successful embroidery project, and I improved as I went along. For the smaller pieces, I straight stitched them, and then for the larger pieces, I kind of used a large round stitch. The large embroidery piece on the back, which I like to call the moneymaker, took 2 weeks to do if I had done it straight, and then for the smaller pieces, they took about a few days. The belt is actually just a really old shower robe belt, which I dyed yellow using acrylic paint and some water. Now moving on to the boots, I absolutely love these. These were a pair of my grandmother's old Ugg boots, and I covered them in the pleather fabric, which I then decorated using the fur I of course used for the cape. Finally, I tied them together using some ribbon. This is just a random ribbon I had lying around and it was not historically accurate. Historically, these probably would have been tied together with vines or some other bottish fiber. I wrapped the pleather around the boot to give off the same shape that it does in the show. Heck, I even did my best to utilize the fraying on the edge. Finally, I again hand sewed the eyelet holes and I wrapped it all together. And as you can tell in the B-roll footage, I wore these in the snow and they held up amazing. Now moving on to the weapon. The Makuri knife was made out of some very thin EVA foam that I had extra, and a Warbler blade. I actually wrapped it all together with electrical tape, and then I used foam clay to create the little details and the shell-shaped details on the side, which I'm so happy worked. Finally, I primed it with some spray primer and then painted it using acrylics. Fun fact, I actually tried carving one of these out of wood, and it didn't go so well. And finally, to tie it all together, I finger knitted a piece of cotton string. Then I used a wood bead that I had lying around. I think this added such a nice little detail. And I just want to be completely clear with everyone, I did not cover it with bare penis skin. Now moving on to the larger knife, I actually used just some old plastic clay working tools as a dowel for the EVA foam blade. And then I actually covered the blade in Warbler later in time, just to make it look a little nicer and to make it a lot sturdier. And for the handle, this is actually one of the first things I made on this project. I took some thicker EVA foam and layered it. I cut out the shapes as I saw in the show. And then I primed it and painted it with mostly spray paints. Then I used some cord wrapping around the hilt, and I covered it all with some leather I had from a different project. Finally, for the quiver, I actually made this out of some, again, scrap EVA foam from an old project that hadn't really worked out, and then I covered it in table mats. Then I covered it with some fake leather that I had again from a previous project, and I painted it like so. I painted this using acrylic paints, and I used a mixture of coppers, browns, and black to make it the great color. I had some trouble drawing out the design on the front as it is a pretty intricate design, and I was doing this by hand. However, I think it turned out quite nice. For the back, which doesn't look as nice, I used an old scarf that I also painted a little bit to make it a little more weathered. Then I sewed it on using embroidery thread. The really fun thing about this project is I got to use different textures, and I think that the table mats really help add that extra texture. So that's a bit of a tip. If you ever need a woven texture or any even just kind of strange texture but also need to be somewhat durable, you can use table mats. Finally, for the arrows, which are not functional, I used a wooden dowel, which I got at Walmart. I also used some thin EVA foam for the tip. I made these all pretty quickly. And to top this all off, I did not make this. This is a 15-pound bow I've had for a long time.
Entry number 12 in the Journeyman category. This is Romanov Ball Cosplay as Asirpa from Golden Kamuy.